In Dart, top level functions and class instance methods behave the same as most other languages. The first function that you will see in any Dart application is the void main, which, as we discussed earlier, is the entry point of your application. This is also a predefined function in the Dart framework. Another predefined function that you will see constantly is the print function, which is used to print something to the console. Now let's get into the syntax of a function in Dart. The syntax may be familiar to you if you are coming from Java background, but may be different if you're coming from, say, Kotlin background. So this is a function that basically takes in a parameter for page number and returns a string that says page contents. The first part of the syntax, which says string, is the return type. So that means this function should only return the value of string. The next is the function name. In this case, it's called open page, which will be anything that you decide that describes the action happening in this function body. Then comes the input variables, or also called the parameters inside the round brackets, which is the information you need to perform any task in the function. So suppose you need the page number to understand which page content you need to return with the function. And then finally in the green is the function body, that is the entire block of code or the group of statements that perform the given task and finally return a result back to the caller. When you finally need to call this function, you just need to mention the function name, which is open page in our case, and provide the input variable, which is the third page number in our example. This input variable is also called arguments in most programming languages. Now we learn the basic anatomy of functions in Dart, the syntax of parameters and arguments, but there is more to this that is very interesting. Like suppose if you interchange this parameters, this will throw an error. This is because the order is not followed. It expects a double first and then a string. So you cannot change the position while calling the function. You cannot also remove an argument in case you feel that it is not required anymore. The error says that 2 positional arguments expected, but only 1 found. So in this case, the positional arguments are price and item name, but we just mentioned the price, so this will throw an compile time error and it will not run. But there are cases where we must have the option to omit some arguments as they are optional probably. In such a case, we can wrap the parameters with square brackets while declaring the function. So something like this. Solved that error, but it brought up a new one which says the parameter item name cannot have a value of null because of its type, but the implicit default value is null. Since we have not provided the item name here, so obviously the implicit value is null. So you can imagine this is something like equivalent to this, which is not allowed because here item name cannot have null because of its property. So these brackets mean that the item name is null or can be null, but the data type provided is non-nullable in nature. Now remember what we discussed about making variables nullable? We can do the same here and add a question mark at the end of the string, and the error vanishes and the code finally compiles. So now if you run this will run, but here item name is null, so the cost of null is 400, which in our case is doable. However, this does not solve the error if we want to change the position while calling the function. So in this case, if I make this watch first and then the item, then the price. So here the item name is first and then the price, and it throws an error again that argument type string cannot be assigned to the parameter type double, and the same for the second one as well. So in such cases, Dart actually provides an even better way of doing this, where we can have both optional and non-positional parameters. So let's remove the square brackets and question marks first, and now wrap the entire parameters with curly braces. Now, if you see the errors, it says too many positional arguments, zero expected, but two found. Because at this point, when you add these curly braces, they are no more a positional parameter. They become a non-positional parameter. So in the caller, the change that you have to make is, in this case, make it item name. And for this, you make it price. So it becomes like a key value pair where the key will be the parameter name and the value is the value that you were generally providing. Now this makes all the parameters optional and non-positional by default. You can also interchange the arguments if you wish to. So here item name can go as a second parameter for this color, and it will not throw error for this at least. But it does bring up the previous issue that since these parameters are optional, that means it can take null as a value, but these data types are defined as non-nullable here. So like earlier, item name can be null, so let's add that question mark here. But price is a required parameter. So in order to tell the compiler that the price argument is definitely required and mandatory while calling this function, we can add a required annotation here before this parameter during the declaration. Now you can easily omit the item name if you wish to. But you cannot compile the code if the price argument is also omitted. See, the error says that the named parameter price is required, but there is no corresponding argument. So you need to add the price argument because it is required. This approach is pretty useful if you have a bunch of parameters in your functions where a handful of them are not required and therefore optional. And also, remembering the order is sometimes cumbersome. Anyway, another cool thing to know about functions in Dart is that if you have a function that only has a single expression like this, then you can convert it to this shorthand syntax with this fat arrow function. But remember, if functions have more than one expression or statement, then this shorthand syntax is not possible. Anyway, so that was all the basic things that you need to know about functions in Dart. So our step towards Flutter is even smoother.